As we dive deeper behind the scenes of security and cybercrime today, interviewing top leaders from around the world and sharing true cybercrime stories to raise awareness. But first, a huge thank you to all of our executive co-producers who subscribed to our Prime membership and fueled our growth. So please help us keep this going by subscribing for free to our YouTube channel and downloading our episodes on Apple or Spotify podcasts so we can continue to bring you more of what matters. This is Cybercrime Junkies, and now the show. All right. Well, welcome everybody to Cybercrime Junkies. I'm your host, David Morrow. In the studio today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Joseph Brunsman of the Brunsman Group, a thought leader in cybersecurity, one of the leaders in the cybersecurity insurance industry. And we're going to be discussing some cybersecurity insurance landmines today, some key cases that have been happening in litigation, and overall get some great insight. Joseph, welcome to the studio again, my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me back. Always fun
No.
to talk about stuff I nerd out on. So
Absolutely. And I absolutely welcome you back. You were with us for listeners and viewers that may not be aware, like right in the beginning, like about a year ago when we first started. So we've got some upgrades in our equipment. So that's all good. So I'm really glad to have you here. So, one of the things that are top of mind that we hear about all the time are who's liable in some of these big data breaches, right? We see regulations, we see investigations, we see fines being issued. There's notices of class action lawsuits. And the cybersecurity insurance industry, just like every industry within that insurance industry, right? Like all of the subsets, they really drive behavior a lot. And so first, let's start from the beginning. Tell us what are some of the bigger changes that have been happening in the insurance industry for cybersecurity?
Yeah, so the cyber insurance industry, people have to understand, is within a few years is going through the changes what traditionally took probably about 40 years for other insurance products to go through, right?
Great point.
So
Exactly right.
if we go back to 10 years ago, 2013, right? What was the big deal?
It wasn't
not
a
that
thing.
big of a deal. So,
right. And we've talked about this. A lot of that has to do with the dark web, the productization, the formation, the organized crime element that has gotten involved in cybercrime and just the large scale of these attacks that are going on.
Oh, yeah. I mean, who would have forecasted supply chain attacks 10 years ago? Not a thing.
Yeah.
Who would have forecasted triple extortion events?
Exactly.
5 years ago. Not
Cyber
a thing.
espionage, right? Like,
oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's getting crazy. And so the insurance market they're not really sure, I think, what to do about a lot of this. Now we have AI coming down the pike, and people are asking me, what impact is AI going to have on cyber insurance? And the answer is, I have some ideas, but I don't really know. And I don't think anybody really knows until disaster strikes, and then it's going to become a problem. And then the insurance industry is going to start adding additional exclusions to the policy to try and deal somehow with this AI issue. But yeah, right now we're seeing some big changes that really actually make sense in the cyber insurance world. Do you want me to get into some of those?
What are some of the bigger ones? When we were on earlier, we talked about, when you were on before, we were talking about that one case, the ICT case in Central Illinois, where the manufacturer had applied for cybersecurity insurance with travelers, right? And had said, or ICS, it was ICS in travelers, and had applied and answered one of the questions in the application that, yes, we have multi-factor authentication. But they didn't. They only had it on one server, and the ransomware attack actually affected another component in their infrastructure, and then Travelers had to rescind, revoke the contract. Um, what what changes have happened for business owners in applying for security
Yeah. So,
insurance?
so what we're seeing now, just in the pure application process, and I think we're going to see more changes on the policy side, but just on
Hmm.
the application side, what we're seeing is really where I thought, I guess, somewhat naively, that the insurance industry should have been, 5, 10 years ago. And that is they're starting to ask very specific, pointed questions. And
Ah,
so for the
interesting.
business owners out there, they have to start realizing, they are applying effectively for a legal contract, which is what insurance is, right? So if you're a business out there and your nephew is the company's IT guy, that's just not going to cut it anymore. Like you have to have legitimate professionals because, frankly, I say this with love in my heart as a former IT guy. The ability, I think, for a layperson who is probably world class in some other industry, being able to accurately and adequately answer the questionnaires we're seeing coming out, the possibility it's just getting smaller and smaller, and the odds that they, even in good faith, answer something incorrectly, I think is just getting way too high.
And the
Um,
risk there is obvious, right? The risk
oh,
there is
sure.
that if you don't answer those questions correctly, the risk isn't underwritten correctly, and therefore then they're going to wind up declining coverage when there's an event.
Yeah, if you have a material representation,
Hmm.
which would be kind of the official term, but if you just say something and you don't have that thing, all of these policies, when a claim occurs, you have to assist the insurance company with that investigation. They're going to find that out, right? And
Right.
that is even that.
And that is not the day you want to be finding that out, right? Like it's better to spend the
Mhm.
time in the beginning and doing it right, because on the day of boom or shortly after boom, when your files are turning white and clients are calling and things are
Mhm.
just, it's all messed up. You can't, you're dealing with cyber criminals extorting you. You have to deal with that. You have to, like, legal, HR, all of the PR is involved, all of this. And that's the time when you have to be like figuring out you didn't fill out the application adequately, right? That's a
Yeah, and then
tough, it's a tough
yeah.
thing.
And we have to think too that the Travelers ICS case was a very kind of traditional insurance industry case,
Yeah, it
right? Where the
was.
insurance company is going, "Hey, you lied on this application." Now, truthfully, to be fair to ICS, the application questions that they were presented
Right.
were pretty asinine, so broad that I think personally, I think the insurance guy had some culpability there that you can't send out questionnaires that contain
Yeah.
the word etc. Right? Unless you really
Right.
know what they're getting at. So the application is just kind of the front end. On the back end, right? You already kind of alluded to. We're already seeing, increased activity from bad guys in novel ways that most business
Hmm.
owners can't anticipate. Now we're seeing regulatory bodies really start taking a hard look. So we just
Hmm.
saw SolarWinds. They just got slapped with another Wells notice. So that's going. We could talk about that in a little
So
more detail.
explain
But
to the list. Yeah, no,
Mhm.
let's jump right in there. So
Sure.
explain to the listeners what a Wells notice is.
All right. So a Wells notice, and this is under the kind of broad umbrella of business owners can no longer bury their head in the sand. That goes for
Right.
the entire C-suite, right? It's if you have a hand in this, you have to start taking this seriously. And I always recommend to business owners, please ask what you feel are stupid questions, right?
Hmm.
Because I'm not an expert in your industry. You're not an expert in my industry. And so it is fair game to say, hey, what does this mean? What are our
Right.
obligations here? How does this actually play out? We could talk about some of the crazy
Ask what
exclusions
if,
coming.
right? Like, what if something like this happens?
Yes.
Would I be covered? what if something like this happens? Would I be covered? Right.
Yes. And so this Wells notice, the gist of a Wells notice is it's the SEC. It's a letter that comes from the SEC and it says, hey, our employees thinking we are going to bring an enforcement action against you, you have an opportunity to respond. All right.
It's like a
Now,
notice of intent from the SEC.
yeah,
It's like a
yeah,
pre-litigation letter.
yes.
Not a
So
fun
it's
letter to receive, I would imagine.
no, no. And this is the second Wells notice letter that the SEC has received. And for listeners of this show, they should be aware
Yeah.
that Wells notice got sent to pretty much all the top executives, as well as the CISO, as well as the CFO. So not even the CFO is safe, right? So the SEC is saying, hey, if you're an SEC registrant, we're taking this seriously. We're coming after you, right? Now, maybe the listener of this show is going, we're a private company, though. So
Right.
we don't have anything to do with the SEC. Maybe you're correct, but now the FTC is also bringing
right.
personal enforcement actions in case of Drizzly, like the CEO that follows that guy for 10 years, which
That
means
was a really interesting case. The Drizzly case was interesting, right? So for those that don't know, the Drizzly is a alcohol delivery service, right? And the FTC told the company that they have to implement all these security changes, right? All these rigorous changes. But also they told the CEO directly that, and I believe the CEO was pushed out of that role at that company, or maybe still there, but they told the CEO that for the next 10 years or so, no matter where you go, you have all of these restrictions. And anywhere you go, you have to have specific security standards implemented. It was a really shocking case, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I think in the light of FTC Chairwoman Khan's disclosure on this, right? She effectively says, hey, the days of CEOs failing up, in her words, are gone. So if you're the CEO of an organization, that organization experiences a breach, we can come after you personally, and that consent orders follow you around. And probably the worst part of this for any executive is going, all right, well, maybe I'm a CEO and I think I'm special, right? Which is probably true. You're a CEO, right? You're a unique individual. You're not so unique that you do not compete against other people trying to get CEO jobs. There's only so many of you, but there's more than one. And so the board of directors of these other organizations, do you think that if you have the FTC breathing down your neck for a decade, plus all the reporting requirements, they can come in whenever they want, doesn't even count the 20-year consent order against the company proper. No board of directors, in my mind, would take the hit, right? To say, oh, we'll bring the government into our boardroom, we'll bring them into our company. No business is going to want to do that. And so it's effectively, you either hope you really enjoy your job or you're going to be flipping burgers, right? So that's something that I think was, in your words, truly shocking.
It was,
and
in that case, that case was kind of egregious, wasn't it? Because what happened was the CEO was aware, as well as other executives there, of a data breach about 2 years before kind of notifying people of it. Was that it?
Yeah, a lot of it. Sorry, keep going.
No, I was please go ahead. Like from what I understand, it said the FTC says CEO Drizzly's CEO James Corey Rellis was alerted to a potential security incident 2 years before a data breach was exposed to the public, where it exposed personal information of 2.5 million customers of the alcohol delivery service. And the FTC said so egregious were Rellis's actions, according to the agency, that not only will his company face a series of data privacy requirements, but Rellis himself will as well. And he has to, anywhere that he goes, has to have a data protection program, and a complete like information security program. And they listed out all of these different things that any company he has an interest in or owns in or serves in
Mhm.
management in any capacity and has to serve. So that's unlike other cases.
Yes. I think business owners and executives need to understand that the broad scope of all of this is that the walls are closing in, whether it's
Hmm.
the hackers, the regulators, the plaintiff's bar with class action claims,
Yep.
they're all coming for you. And it's
Hmm.
something that if you if you're not taking this threat seriously, if you don't have a plan of implementation, if you're skipping the QBRs with your MSP,
Hmm.
if you think this is somebody else's problem, all of these entities are saying, no, this is your problem and it's your personal problem. And we're going to keep enforcing that. And I understand, like right now, the economy is hurting. We don't have unlimited money, right? Executives are sitting there. They're trying to weigh kind of all of these competing interests. And I understand. But the big dogs, the attorneys, the bad guys, they're all saying this has to be something top of mind, right? You have
Yep.
all these new laws coming out, the new SEC disclosure laws, um, the SEC coming after SolarWinds again, right?
Yep.
Where all it honestly takes, and this is on the class action claim side, this is a regulatory side, a company has one bad day, and then
Hmm.
it turns into what I call the investigation death spiral.
Hmm.
Documents start getting subpoenaed, right? You have an email from the CISO where it's, hey, I talked to the board, I talked to the CEO, I told him we had security flaws. He told me to pound sand because we don't have money for it. That's going to pop up in court. And then your
Right.
ship is sunk. Or
Right.
you're a business, you sat down at QBR, your MSP said, hey, you know what? I think these additional security controls are going to be useful for you, right? For XYZ reason. You told them no. All right. Well, what's the plaintiff's attorney going to say? You knew there was
Right.
a problem.
Hmm.
And the plaintiff's attorney is going to say, but you're this greedy businessman and you cared more about your take home pay than the security of your customers' personal information. And
Right.
so your guys got hit. Now you're going to pay. And
Yep.
it's just whether that's right, wrong, or otherwise, that's just the way the world's going. Right.
Well, it's
So,
very similar to other class action suits and product
mhm,
liability, malpractice cases. I mean, look at like, scaffolding incidents, construction incidents, things like that. If you don't comply with certain regulations like OSHA or things like that, and you save
yeah.
money by not doing it, you are liable, right? You will be liable. Like
Hmm.
there's a there's not a shortage of attorneys, right? And so what'll
Hmm.
happen is they have power of subpoena, they will uncover everything. And then there's the right way and the wrong way of handling a breach, right? Trying to cover it up, doing things if you're in a public company, like what we saw with Equifax, right? The Equifax
Yep.
breach, the executive team found out about it. And before we all found out about it, they were doing insider trading or allegedly doing insider trading. And
Yeah.
so there's a whole host of things that obviously one should not do, but it's very similar to knowing that a big accident happened, right? Well, before we tell the
Hmm.
public that this huge accident happened or a defective product, right? Before we tell the public of that, let's do these things in our personal interest against the interests of the customers.
Yeah. I mean, the SEC, which is now coming after SolarWinds again, all of this, I think, got sparked off yet again because SolarWinds just settled this big class action claim following that event from, what was it, 2020, I think.
Yep.
Anyways, they had,
Yeah, we've had people on. We had uh, Robert Siafi on, who was one of the heads of one of the MSPs who had SolarWinds. And when that compromise occurred, all of his clients, he described what it was like that day and just seeing his files and
oof.
not being able to help the clients and all of that. It was very moving. It was tragic, actually.
Now put that in light of, I have it right here, 10 former employees of SolarWinds
Mm.
stated that SolarWinds did not employ the cybersecurity measures it purported to have, including they had no security team, no security information policy, no password policy, no security awareness training, no network segmentation. And the court held that CEO, quote, acted with at least severe recklessness when he touted the security measures implemented at SolarWinds.
Right.
Right. So there was also the stock trading issue at SolarWinds, if you recall, where
Mhm.
allegedly, they didn't know, but the CEO sold like 20 million, and the two, I think, private equity venture capital guys sold 260 million. But a few days before it came out in the press that
Right. In
SolarWinds had
between
an
the
issue.
time of the incident, the general technology awareness of the incident and the public disclosure.
Shocking. God, what great timing, right? Like they didn't know. Who would have known?
Right.
But yeah, all of this just points to businesses have to start getting into this, right? Like I see a lot of
Yeah.
firms out there where you have the big cheese running the show, and he goes, I'm really good at engineering or accounting or manufacturing or insert whatever in the blank. I
Mhm.
don't know a damn thing about cybersecurity. And this field is so complex and it's so overwhelming. I can't even begin to understand it. So I have, I only got a couple years left. It's the
Right.
next guy's problem, right?
Right.
The world is saying it's not the next guy's problem. It's
It's
your
still your
problem.
problem. Yeah,
And
it's
they,
still
they
your
could
problem.
they
And
could go
it's
after
a
the
matter of good faith, isn't it? I mean, isn't there a good, I mean, there are affirmative defenses that can be raised to some of these
Mhm.
class action claims, right? Like if they have real-time detection, they have certain, they look at the NIST standards or the SIS controls, or they look at these rules and guidelines out there, and they're doing some of them or most of them, right? I mean, sometimes the threat actors are still going to get in, but a lot of it looks, I mean, I think from what I've seen is the investigations and the class action suits are really looking at egregious behavior, right? Like this was brought to your attention, you said no because you didn't want to spend the money there, right? And when
Yeah.
that occurs, then you're not even doing best practices, right?
Mhm.
But for an organization that's doing best practices and then just succumbs to a advanced persistent threat or a threat actor, um, there may be some liability, but it's not necessarily going to pierce that veil, is it? I mean, what are you saying?
Yeah. So I'll tell you an illustrative story. Um, I have the benefit of being the dumb insurance guy in the room at every conference.
I'm one of
So
the
I get to
dumb
ask.
technology guys, so I just get to sit in the room and go, "Yeah, we can provide one of these layers," and then just listen in
Mhm.
as people commit complete negligence in the managing of their brands,
Yes.
right?
So I
You know,
so one of these conferences that I was speaking at, they brought me in to speak, and I'm sitting in the speaker's room, and I see a guy who's just dressed to the nines. So I
Mhm.
ask him, I'm like, "Hey, what do you do?" And he goes, "Oh, I'm an attorney." And I was like, "What flavor of attorney are you?"
Exactly.
And
We're all
he
attorneys. Like
and
everybody and
so
their brother is an
yeah.
attorney.
So he goes, "Oh, I bring class action claims after data breaches." And I
There
was
you
like,
go.
"Really?" I was like, "Hey, I'm just the insurance guy." Um, I was like, what is that silver bullet that you look for?" And he goes, "Oh, it's stupid easy." He goes, "Every time." He goes, "We bring a class action claim. We subpoena the internal documentation of whoever's in charge of security. We look for a couple keywords. We get right to the email where it says, I presented," and this happened in the SolarWinds case.
Mhm.
And the guy actually quit in protest, but he goes, every time, "Hey, I presented to the executives, I presented to the board. These are the flaws that we have in our cybersecurity. These are the most egregious things we need to deal with right now. We're not secure. They told me to pound sand because they don't have money for it. We're definitely going to get hit. They know it. They just don't care." Right? Some internal communication. He goes, every time we get that.
Yep.
So then I asked him, I was like, what is it you would hate to see as a plaintiff's bar attorney trying to bring a class action claim? So he sat there for a second. He goes, I've never seen it. In his words, he goes, because they're too dumb and greedy. Once again, those were his words.
Hmm.
But he goes, if I got in there and this company goes, yeah, we knew we weren't perfect, but the executive team had sat down, right, with, let's say, our MSP, our CISO, whomever.
Hmm.
We worked out a plan of implementation, right? Because we went, okay,
Right.
these are the vulnerabilities we have.
Layers of security, right? Layers of security to kind of detect, defend, etc., and then some incident response planning about what happens, a tabletop exercise, something like that, in case something happens. They're kind of doing everything they can do, right?
Yeah, right. So if you're sitting there, you're going, we weren't intentionally being negligent or grossly
Right.
negligent or
Right.
overly reckless. Like we had budgetary constraints. So we sat down and we said, all right, how do we start eating this elephant one bite at a time? 2 months from now, we're going to implement this. 6 months from now, we'll have the budget for that. 2 years from now, we're going to have the budget for this. Right. And obviously, you have to keep up to date with that. It's not a one time deal because that would sink the ship right there.
Exactly. And or at a minimum, it would sink it from $100 million class action case to a $50 million or a 25. Like it would give you so many defenses that it's
Mhm.
reasonably great negotiating leverage.
Oh, certainly. Certainly. And
Right.
that's all of this is within light of, I think companies need to start doing that anyway, even if if they don't care whatsoever about regulatory bodies, whether it's the state
Right.
attorneys general or it's federal regulators or it's uh, the bad guys coming after you, right? Or the
Well,
plaintiffs
yeah,
bar coming after you.
The SEC fines and the FTC fines are going to be pennies on the dollar to what they're ultimately going to wind up paying, right?
Oh,
So
absolutely.
even if
But
they ignore that part, just think of the overall exposure and what
mhm.
defense will you have when it does happen.
And you're correct. And I would say, let's say there's a business owner out there and he goes, I'm not worried about any of that, right? Well, now he needs to start worrying about cyber insurance because,
Right.
as you alluded to previously, cyber insurance is tired of just throwing hundreds of millions, billions of dollars out the door. So those policies, they are a changing, right? So the
Right.
application is just kind of the front end. What is here and not so bad in the public eye, because it may not even get litigated like Travelers versus ICS did. Well,
Mhm.
you add exclusions to the cyber policy. Now, who is reading that cyber policy? Well, I'm a nerd, so I read them and it's what I do. But the general rule there is the insurance guy, absent special circumstances, probably doesn't have to read it, probably doesn't have to explain what's in it, doesn't have to tell you about any alternatives that are out there. The business owner, they're not reading it.
No.
Maybe the MSP is taking a look, right, in very specific circumstances. But what we're seeing are things that entirely make sense from the insurance industry perspective that business owners have to plan ahead for because there are exclusions coming. You either A, already have them on your policy, you just don't know it, nobody told you, and you didn't read it, or B, they're coming at your next renewal or in the near future, and you may not know that you have these exclusions until 14 days, 7 days prior to your insurance renewal. So some of those that I think business owners really need to start honing in on. Great example, legacy hardware and software exclusions, right? So let's say
Right.
you're a medical practice, you have some MRI running on Windows 2000 or whatever. Well, is that supported or not? Is it part of your network or not? Are you going to buy a new MRI machine to avoid that exclusion? Those things
Right.
are crazy expensive. Probably not. So now you can't expect your IT folks, your MSP to suddenly just isolate something from your network in 5 minutes, right? It's just not that simple. So you need the lead time to do it. So is that exclusion going to be in your next policy? I don't know. I don't know your business, but if you just plan for it ahead of time, it won't be a big deal. Another one,
Right.
like the legacy software, right? how many businesses don't even know what software they're using? Or
Right.
at every QBR with their MSP, they're like, hey, this software is out of date. It's not supported. We don't deal with this. It's in our MSA. It's in our contract. And the business owner goes,
Well, it's still
yeah, but
working, so
it
we'll just
works.
keep using it.
Exactly.
Right.
Right.
So
Or,
that could potentially expose them to liability because it's not supported, there's no patching. So once those vulnerabilities are known, there's no fix for it. So threat actors are getting right in.
yeah, so it's a double whammy. You're more likely to experience a cyber event.
Mm-hmm.
You're more likely to have your coverage denied by a cyber insurer, right? Because a cyber insurer, think about it. If you went, hey, I have this great expensive car, there's no locks on the doors.
Right.
What insurance company is going to ensure that they're not, right? Then you have to worry about, well, if that comes out in a class action claim that you were, or a regulatory action that you're knowingly using software that's no longer supported and has, I mean, the business owner wouldn't know it, but just go online, you'll see all of these known vulnerabilities in the software. How would you
Mm-hmm.
sit there as a business owner or as an executive in that organization and say, we promise we weren't being negligent. We just knowingly used this piece of software where there was a readily available alternative that was more secure, that would have kept our clients' information more secure. We just didn't do it because it costs money, right? Like, that is not going to be a good defense. Um,
Right.
we're seeing other exclusions. So things that business owners would have literally no insight on, critical vulnerability exclusions. So what's that? Well, manufacturers put them out there. Um, MITRE has this giant running list of critical vulnerabilities.
Yep.
The one, the one,
These are known things, known vulnerabilities that expose an organization to threat actors, and they're sold by
yeah,
IABs, like initial access brokers on the dark web, for
yep,
ransomware gangs and cybercrime gangs to attack.
exactly, right. So at least as the insurance policy is concerned, the one that comes to mind is they said, hey, if this is a CVSS of 8 or greater for the CVE, which is nonsense to any non-technical person, which should scare the average business owner, you have 14 days to implement the patch after it comes out. Now, that's something where, yeah, the CEO could be held personally responsible for that, because if he's on record as saying, let's say it's a large accounting firm, and he goes, during tax season, you don't change anything on our network. No exceptions. Don't even ask. This big critical vulnerability comes out, right? IT guys go, the boss man said nothing gets changed. Then you get your toast, all right? The attorneys are going to crucify you. The insurance company can try coverage. And all of this is just, let's say you get away with all of it,
Right.
right? You don't get sued. The insurance pays out. You didn't have the exclusion. Well, guess what? Now at your next renewal, you're going to have to justify what you've done to avoid a similar event occurring anyways.
Yeah.
So you're going to spend the money one way or another. It's just a matter
Unbelievable.
of, I just tell business owners, I go, hey, my grandfather once told me, he goes, how do you know if someone is being truthful? Like, what is the most foundational metric you can use? And the most foundational metric you can use, I think this is true. My grandfather was a wise guy. He goes, if it's against someone's best interest
Yeah.
and they're still telling you. So that's where I'm coming from. Hey, you don't want to update your network. You want to keep having breaches. I'm going to make a ton of money if you can eventually even get insurance. So take it from the
Mm-hmm.
guy who goes, hey, the better your controls are, the lower your premium is going to be, both now and in the future, the less likely you are going to have a breach, and on and on
And
and
then
on.
the lower exposure you would have in the event that you do have a breach.
Exactly. Exactly. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So take it from me. I'm the guy
So high
saying,
level, let's back up just a quick second.
mhm,
High level, cybersecurity insurance, a standard plan. The things that it
mhm.
covers, not everybody even understands exactly what it all covers. it covers the duty to defend's broader than the duty to
Mhm.
indemnify still in those policies, right? So
Sure.
it means you get a lawyer, right, to defend you in
Mhm.
cases. They'll pay for the lawyer. Um, they'll pay for the judgment, but they won't pay for the full judgment in like a class action suit, will they? Or will they be on the hook for that?
So it depends. And this is where companies have to start being very economical is maybe the best way to put it. Or they have to start thinking about just the dollar figures involved. So
Hmm.
I wrote an article for Journal of Accountancy or CPA Journal, something like that, 2019. I went through every class action claim and I was like, hey, if you're not $1 billion company that lost like 200,000 records, you're good. Well, that's gone. So now it's going against, we're seeing class action claims against even much smaller organizations. And so it's difficult to determine what the metrics are. The best I've heard is about 350,000 for defense and about 600 to 650,000. This is just for a small business. So about 650,000 for damages awarded. That's $1 million out the door. But we
Right.
also have to think if you're a small, medium-sized business, well, how big is your cyber policy? Because if you're getting hit with a class action claim,
It's
well
not going to
then,
be. It's not going to be 650 grand. It's not going to be 500 grand.
right. But we have to think you already had to pay for the ransomware event or the data
Right.
breach or whatever that situation was.
Yeah.
That costs money. Now you got to go to court. And as we're seeing now, right? So you have those big class action claims. That's almost $1 million right there.
Hmm.
Now you have to think, all right, well, now the regulators, as we saw in this SEC Wells notice against SolarWinds, now they're taking the information from those class action claims to bring regulatory issues to your door, right? So it just like keeps compounding and compounding. And the easy answer is sit down with your MSP, sit down with your IT folks. How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, right?
Right.
It's
Yeah. Attend
where you
those
at.
QBRs, attend those quarterly business reviews, and take the advice that the subject matter experts are providing.
Yeah, I mean,
Right. Because
even
you can always
mhm.
use that as a defense to lower that amount.
Yes, I think that's going to be material in a defense. And I would say,
Absolutely.
man, how many MSPs have I talked to that go, we never have anybody show up at the QBR, or
Oh yeah, all the time.
they've pushed that back for years. It's like, well,
Hmm.
are you under the new FTC safeguards rule? You're going to need to document as a business owner that you were there, right? So
Hmm.
there's and the people that are listening to this, if they go, I don't even know what the FTC safeguards rule is. I've never even heard of a Wells notice.
So
Good.
what?
You don't want to.
Let's explain what is the so the FTC will have they will enforce unfair business practices or consumer protection, right, against
Exactly.
private companies, right?
Yes. And
So
they've yep, big companies, small companies, billion-dollar
right,
companies, individuals,
right,
everybody.
and all of that information, while it is not public, that investigation isn't public. The findings and the evidence can be used in a civil proceeding, I would imagine.
Well,
Maybe not.
the FTC complaint, that's gonna become
Right.
public. So
Yep.
all your dirty
The
laundry
fact
is
that
gonna get
they're
aired
under
out.
investigation is public for sure.
Yeah, so I would say, generally they're gonna come in when they see something really egregious. And
Mhm.
the FTC, the new safeguards rule, I mean, there's a bunch of ways this could play out. There's a bunch of regulatory bodies that deal with Graham-Leach-Bliley Act that falls under this,
Mhm.
but FTC is dealing with financial institutions with the new safeguard rule, right? But that doesn't just mean if you're a business owner watching this, you're like, I'm not a bank. I don't care. No,
Right.
that's not who it is. They've gone after blood testing companies. They've gone
Mhm.
after uh, auto dealerships, right? Because they
Mhm.
said, oh, the information you have, you're a financial institution under the law. So it doesn't matter how the business owner classifies business or even how somebody else classifies their business. It's how the FTC classifies your business. And
Yep.
so, whether it's a class action claim and then the FTC gets involved, or the FTC gets involved, that opens up avenue through discovery for a class action claim. I mean, it's just bad news all around when the answer is so simple.
Just
It's so
do
simple.
just do reasonable efforts, right? I
Yeah.
mean, just
Yeah.
basic best practices. Just kind of, allocate because it's a fraction of what you'll ultimately have to pay, right?
Oh,
Oftentimes these standards or these systems of these layers of security are pennies on the dollar to what you're going to be exposed to. And
yeah. And
and breaches are in the news every day, so the odds of it happening are always increasing.
yeah, and I think that um, I think the metric was something like 60% of companies increase prices after a cyber event because they have to pay
Hmm.
for all these additional controls, et cetera.
Right.
Plus, if you get hit with an FTC consent order, not even counting the individual craziness that would befall you, but the consent order against the company, that's a 20-year consent order. And it changes with
Wow.
technology. That's not insurable. Insurance companies aren't going to pay for the next 20 years for all the stuff you got to do. Right? That's just not happening. And then you got to start thinking, all right, well, let's say I need to bring in an MSP. I touch the stove, it's hot. I don't know what this stuff means. I need a subject matter expert. Well, now you got to think, what's that guy going to charge you when he Googles your name and he finds out, oh, this guy's under a consent order? Well, if
Right.
I was an MSP, I'm going to say, I'm charging you minimum 3, 4 times the going rate because now my liability exposure, when you have the federal government poking around all the time, is astronomical, right? So
And then
the
and then there's the
literally the
Drizzly case that we were talking about earlier, where the CEO
Mhm.
personally, anywhere that he goes now,
Yeah.
has all these restrictions on.
And for people listening, the way that that personal consent order was written, I reasonably believe that could just as easily apply to a CIO, CISO,
Yeah.
CFO, if you're a public company and you have to report on the effectiveness of your internal controls, all of that, right? It could very easily befall anybody within the C suite. So
Hmm.
it's something where there's all these moving parts, and the easiest answer is just sit down, figure out where are we at, where do we need to go, have a plan on how to get there, right? Make sure the CFO is there so you can fund it, right? It's really, I don't want to say it's that simple, but that's how all this begins, right? As you go,
Yep.
all right, I have to put my pride on the shelf and say, this is something I fundamentally don't understand because it's probably too complex, really, for any one person to truly understand. And so,
Hmm.
like any other problem in business, what do you do? And it's a big problem. All right, I'm
Right.
going to need legal here. I'm going to need IT. I'm going to need finance. I'm going to need all these folks. Sit down.
And
Let's hash
together,
out.
yeah, the wisdom it always bubbles to the top, right? You're
Yes.
always brighter collectively than any one individual. Yeah.
Oh, precisely.
That's
Yeah.
that's really interesting. So what happens in a scenario when the cybersecurity insurance isn't enough? Let's say somebody gets $1 million policy, but they get
Mhm.
hit with a lawsuit for class action, or even if it's not a class action, it's just a data breach lawsuit. What
Yeah.
what happens if it's a $3 million lawsuit? Is the business liable for the excess?
It starts funny. I was actually just I was in Dallas. I was presenting at this big MSP conference, and I was sitting down with some attorneys, and we were trying to hash this out, right? Like what would actually happen.
Yeah,
And it's very fact pattern dependent.
sure.
To sound like an attorney, I'm sorry for a little while, but the
No, it's
gist of it
true though.
is, if they
Because
start going,
oftentimes they'll just settle within the policy limits, and sometimes they're not going to if the organization is in a position to pay. Is that a fair statement?
uh, I mean, it depends. So The insurance company generally, I'll say, has a legal obligation to settle within limits. But if you have a data breach, then you have regulatory issues at the same time you're dealing with class action claim, you know, I can't imagine how court going to deal with that. But I know that the
Mhm.
attorneys I was talking to, right, the insurance company is going to throw their hands up and they're going to say, yo, we had a contract for
X
X
amount.
million. You blew through that. We're out.
Yep.
Right. End of story. Past that point, these attorneys I was speaking to, you know, their point was, you know, piercing the corporate veil could be difficult, uh, but it depends, right? Because if the executives were acting in a, you know, grossly negligent fashion, and
Mhm.
that's in the documentation, and that guy's got a summer home, or,
Right.
you know, he's got a home in wherever, right? They were like, yeah, you know, if they acted so far outside the bounds, if they were just sitting there with their blinders on and they're like, ah, it's the next guy's problem, I'm not going to deal with this, then he's like, yeah, they'll go after him. Now, the actual mechanics of that, I'm not a litigation attorney. I'm not a plaintiff's bar guy. So I try to sit with the good guys and help everybody out beforehand. Um, but, you know, to boil it all down, I would say the same thing I tell all my clients, which is you only want to talk to me once a year when I'm taking your money. Like
Right.
that's a good year. If we're talking
Right.
twice in a year, you're having a really bad day. And unlike all the other types of claims we deal with,
Mhm.
when it comes to cyber claims, it is the Wild West. Like I
Right.
can't forecast with any amount of rational certainty what's actually going to happen because
Right.
maybe you just had 5 records that belong and they were residents of some other state you don't belong in. And that state attorney general, he goes, hey, you know what? I'm going to run for Congress next year. How am I going to do that?
Yeah.
Consumer protections. So
Right.
screw
Well,
the
and there's
company, I'll
several
crucify 'em.
states that have bolstered privacy laws, right?
Oh
I mean,
yeah.
there's several states, and a lot of them are taking win, and you may have clients that you didn't even really were aware of as a leader that those laws there would apply. So
Precisely.
there's quite a bit of exposure there.
A
That was
great
really good.
example, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
great example is, Massachusetts.
Yep.
That breach notification law and the data security requirements built into it, like 18 different administrative, technical, and physical safeguards,
Mhm.
applies to any resident of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So maybe you're a
Right.
dental office and you just had someone on vacation, they had a dental emergency, now you have their record and
Mhm.
that gets breached. Well, God bless you. You might have to deal with all that craziness now. Or you're an accounting firm next to a military base, right? And just on and on and on. And what's the easy answer to all of this? It's sit down, figure out where you are, where you need to go, how you're going to fund it to get there. That's the easy answer. Either way, I tell companies, I'm like, hey, take it from me. You're either going to increase your security the easy way or the hard way, right? The easy
Yep.
way is plan of implementation. The hard way is class action claims, regulatory issues after a breach, insurance requirements, et cetera, consent orders, right? So
Yeah.
it's just where the world is going. It's where it's headed. It's
Yep.
probably where we should have been, honestly, 10 years
Years
ago.
ago. Yeah,
But
I would agree. So so we'll have links to your insurance practice in the show notes. I will tell you, people, if you can engage with Joseph Brunsman, there's a wealth of insight and knowledge that you provide, and really appreciate you stopping by the studio. I mean, this is just always insightful. There's always going to be great stories to talk about, and it is the
mhm.
Wild West right now. So we're going to see a lot of big changes in the year to come. So, what if you're going to leave the audience with any words of wisdom, Joseph? What would they be?
Oh, words of wisdom. Um,
I thought I would just
hmm.
tee it up. Like, what would you guide a business owner to do? Sit down with the MSP, lean in a little, listen more.
Yeah, so I'd say words of wisdom. One, do Brazilian jiu-jitsu. It'll change your life.
Yes, I hear.
But two, as it pertains to this discussion, you have to start somewhere, right? And I
Yeah.
promise you, if you're sitting down with all the executives, you're the big cheese, and you're going, hey, you know what? I'm the guy in charge. I can't be the guy that looks like I don't know what's going on. You have already failed, and you are setting yourself up for disaster. So
Yeah.
if you don't know what EDR, MDR, XDR, what a
Mhm.
firewall does, what NIST CSF versus ISO 2700, et cetera, none of us expect that, right?
Right.
But we're going to talk about it, and we don't want to insult your intelligence. But if you don't know, just ask.
Right.
Like,
And when they make suggestions on what to do with those, right? Take those into
mhm,
consideration, because declining those things could result in liability later.
exactly. And it's something where I think all of us that are responsible parties, we know, yeah, your business doesn't have unlimited resources.
Right.
So, like, yeah, you need insurance. That's just part of it, right?
Mhm.
You need defense in depth. That's going to be part of it. You need, all the internal administrative controls. That's going to be part of it too. So it's not just, even though CEOs are being held responsible, it's really, it takes the whole team to get there. And I promise you,
Yeah.
all the other people on your team know no more than you do about this
Yeah.
topic. And
Exactly right.
so any other issue you would have in your business, bring in the subject matter experts. As you could probably tell, I love this stuff more than I probably want to admit to my wife. I was nerded out on this way before it was cool. And so there's plenty of us out there, right,
Yeah.
that are super passionate about this, that want to help you, that will help drive towards that ultimate solution. So just figure out, where am I at? Where do I need to go? How do I get
Yep.
there? Easy as
Yeah,
that.
develop that roadmap with your subject matter experts.
Precisely.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate it, buddy. We will
Thanks, Dave.
we will talk to you soon again. Thanks. See you,
All right.
everybody.
Sounds good.
Thanks. Bye. Well, that wraps this up. Thanks for joining, everybody. Hope you got value out of digging deeper behind the scenes of security and cybercrime today. Please don't forget to help keep this going by subscribing free to our YouTube channel at Cybercrime Junkies Podcast, and download and enjoy all of our past episodes on Apple and Spotify podcasts so we can continue to bring you more of what matters. This is Cybercrime Junkies, and we thank you for joining us.